Anyway.
Okay, so a little bit about me.
Oh. Yeah. Who are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Mackey. Let's see. Let's not go through the whole history of Tim because that would be exceedingly boring and no one would watch past about this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keep it funky.
Keep it fun. So I'm at Black Duck Software right now. I'm in a role of senior technical evangelist, which I've started to really define as being, I have to understand the technologies that are out there, why they're important, why anyone should care about that, and be able to communicate both inward and outward, while desperately trying not to stir the pot too much. And what was it? 5 years ago now, Citrix acquired Cloudstack from cloud.com. And so Cloudstack itself got rolled under the same BU that was dealing with Xen. So that got me into the cloudy world. And then once Citrix decided that it was the Apache Foundation, DSF was a much better home for Cloudstack as a technology stack than whatever Citrix was going to be able to do with it. I kind of followed suit, and that's what ultimately ended up creating the open source business office at Citrix.
Yeah, and so when you're at Citrix and you're working on Xen Source and Xen things, and I guess you touched Cloudstack a bit there as well. But how would you characterize the relationship between the open source efforts and the products that you sold, and what were you trying to do there exactly? I mean, how were you trying to make them, how are you trying to optimize the process?
So that's a really good question, and I think it's one of the things that most corporate organizations really struggle with. The world of open source today is the way that software is developed, and right. Full stop. It doesn't matter whether you're this massive corporate entity or whether you're a small shop. You're following some open source basic concepts. The walls around your source code might only go as far as your building, but within your building, you're very collaborative. You're doing a lot of open communication, open development. Anyone who has an issue can raise their hand. The whole paradigm for how software development has changed since back in the days when I was dealing with all this Go stuff. Trying to build a community for a product that Citrix is also trying to sell is a little bit of a challenge. And so what I did was I took a little bit of a step back and said, what we really want to have is a vibrant community. But that was my ultimate goal, was to have a vibrant community. And I put together, call it a mission statement, manifesto, whatever you want, but that at the end of the day, everyone who is interacting with that community had to feel like they were a valued member of that community, that they were encouraged to contribute back, be that through dollars in the pay Citrix some license, or through code contributions, which we honestly didn't have that many, but also through things like support forums, testing product, things like that. And so what was really nice about the community that got built was that we could go and put to them ideas and know within an hour or two whether it was like the world's best idea or the world's most insane idea, and have that kind of community engagement. That was huge.
How did you so were there a bunch of customers that participated in this community? I mean, were they paying customers? Were they showing up in the forums or whatever other web properties you had?
So they were paying customers. They were free customers. So one of the things that Xen Server kind of quote unquote struggled with was that it was a free platform that you could buy.
Right.
And so when you get down that path, the real challenge is, well, why am I paying the money? And
right.
So that starts to get into the whole concept of open source versus open core. How is the transparency of development? And there were tons and tons and tons of conversations with the legal team, the finance teams, to make certain that we were on the correct side of things like Sarbanes-Oxley.
But did it lead to, like, when customers have access to like the community and kind of like the open source code and everything, does it lead to kind of unrealistic expectations around what the product has? I mean, most of the time, the process for taking code and hardening it is, it takes time and resources. Were they expecting things to magically appear from the community and their, supported products? What was the kind of, like, how did you gather feedback without setting unreasonable expectations and sort of getting them to buy into, your process?
So the biggest challenge that we had for the feature function side of things, was that the fact that Citrix as a commercial entity was the sponsoring organization meant that the potential consumers of the product, be it a paid or free side of things, were really challenged by the fact that, well, the normal product management decision process is something that, well, we should follow. I should be able to go and talk to a product manager and say that this is a core feature for me and I'm going to, quote, buy the product, and you better be implementing it, otherwise I'm going to move on to another platform, whatever that might have been.
Right.
And what was lost in all of that was that this is an open source project.
Right.
And if you liked to have your favorite thing in there, and the two most commonly requested things were on the storage side, either Ceph support or Gluster support, neither of which Xen was really all that adept at that point in time.
Right.
It was not necessarily something that Citrix would go off and say, I want to go and implement this. I don't necessarily see the, quote, market for it. Yes, the users. Right. And so my answer back was consistently, we need to find out whether there's a technological hurdle that would preclude this from ever being a good idea. And that's where the community can come in. They can go and hack together something. And if they come back and they find out that the native RBD support is the wrong answer for a Xen world and you have to stick it in Fuse, well, what are the trade-offs for this? Is this still a viable solution? Is it just too niche for anybody to care about? And go down that path. And so there were people who were going and fulfilling their community obligations, for lack of a better description, by implementing, say, RBD support, seeing what was necessary to pull that off.
Right. I mean, what I found is that it's a great way, like, when you do interact with customers on the sort of upstream community side, it is a great way to construct POCs, true POCs, to actually see if, a given solution will work or has any hope of working, and then you can fold that into, the product over time. But yeah, it's a great way to sort of test things out.
So if you want to take the product or the technology stack and move it into an interesting new direction, upstream engagement is exactly the right way to do that. But by making a commercial product, quote unquote, open source, we weren't going to throw it over the fence and say, oh, well, we don't care about it, as many commercial vendors. The canonical example at that point was IBM doing stuff like that. But we were actually going to actively engage with the community. And we had a new release that was coming out that had some significant platform enhancements. But the reality was we probably didn't have all of the permutations of hardware at our disposal to represent the hundreds of thousands of installations that were out there.
Exactly.
What do we do? And so we had a very well-defined alpha beta preview process behind this. And the first bug that came in was somebody's goofball ILO setup didn't work and they couldn't capture the keyboard. Okay. They couldn't install the product. Okay.
It's a problem.
Kind of a big problem, and not something that we could catch ourselves because we didn't have that particular ILO board with all of its accoutrements in place in order to actually find out what it was. Now that we knew what they had, we could go and make an ask of HP to, can we have some time on a system that looks exactly like this, discover what the root of the bug was, and resolve it, and the world moved on. And that's phenomenal, because in a commercial environment, somebody goes through that exact experience, you've got zero feedback, and they just say, oh, you know what, the Xen Server thing is not for me. Where can I get my equivalent product? And so by having those relationships in the community is awesome.
Right. Cool. So at the time you were there, I think was when KVM came out in the Linux kernel, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And Xen wasn't there at that point.
Well, I can't remember when KVM made it in the Linux kernel. It was 2007, 2008, somewhere around there.
Yeah, and it took Xen to make the kernel until basically, call it a 301 kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, what did that do to your community plans and to your kind of supply chain? Did that disrupt what you were trying to do, what you're trying to build there?
So you would expect that it would, but at that particular point in time, Citrix was very much down the path of, we're a commercial software company.
Got it.
We weren't necessarily engaging at the Xen Server level with the Linux community the way that we ought to have. And to a certain extent, that's one of the reasons why KVM became what it is today, is because we didn't necessarily shepherd things the way that we could have. It's nice that we can go to a LinuxCon and see the KVM Summit guys and the Xen Summit guys very peacefully coexisting now, but that wasn't true for a very long time.
Awesome. Anything you want to? We got like 5 minutes. Anything you want to say about what you're doing at Black Duck, or your role there, and maybe some things you've learned since you've been there?
So, the big thing that that Black Duck's really all about is, we can talk about supply chain and community engagement and community management, but for practical purposes, one of the biggest challenges to open source adoption today is the concept of security. And the reality that the upstream component may not necessarily have as well-defined a security process as you might get from, say, a vendor, a large corporate vendor. And that presents some serious issues as organizations are attempting to adopt open source projects and technologies in their organizations and do so in a responsible manner. And so that's really the focus that I've got right now.
Do you think internal IT is learning that vendors have a role in this, or are they still trying to go down the path of upstream open source and then a few months down the road saying, oops, we need to think about this stuff?
Very much the latter. And it's not even necessarily IT organizations. Development organizations are doing the same thing. So it's very much I'm going to grab stuff, and the vendor relationship is just a significant challenge, but it's actually worse on the development side of the house.
Right.
Because I can go out there and I can find something, some gist that's out there that solves my little problem, and I don't necessarily understand why. There might be license uncertainties about it. There might be security uncertainties about it. You could have someone who's decided that, hey, wait a minute, we're a puppet shop and we're going to do everything puppet, and then along comes a piece of Ansible and they don't know what to do about it, and they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to puppetize it or bring it into a chef environment because that's what they've decided, without necessarily understanding that the pieces can play well together if you just take a step back and understand why. So that's the IT side of things. That's also the development side of things. But when it comes to the actual security decisions that are being made, there's not as much transparency as you would want to have. So if I'm going and deciding that I'm going to put a given component into my project, I'm making that point-in-time decision. And I may not actually have any mechanism to go back and revisit it. Meanwhile, there's some vulnerability that's in there, that's known or unknown, how do I actually attend to it if I didn't actually document why I cared about that specific version or that that component was in there? So there's a lot of maturity model kind of stuff that we have to contend with as an industry. Open source is fantastic. We've moved beyond the GPL bad world into the, well, okay, so we need to figure out exactly what we want to be when we grow up. And one of the things we want to be is consumable by everyone. And put some better practices in place.
Cool.
And I know you've got a limited amount of time, but I'd love to talk about that part.
Well, we can revisit that at some date to be determined in the future. But I would love to have you back. But thank you so much, Tim Mackey, for joining us for the Open Source Entrepreneur Network podcast. This is John Mark Walker, and we'll be seeing you next time. Thanks.